Fuji-Q Highland is known for their insane roller coasters, such as Moonsault Scramble, which exerted 6.5 Gs on the rider, and Dododamba, which has the fastest accelerating launch, launching to 112 miles per hour in 1.6 seconds. But this video isn't about either of those coasters. This video is about Eejanaika. When Eejanaika opened in 2006, it was the world's tallest, longest, and fastest fourth dimension roller coaster. Since then, Dino Conda has taken the speed record. However, I think Eejanaika looks more impressive. Anyway, in this video, I'm going to be building a model of Eejanaika out of K'NEX, as I am unable to go to Japan and ride it myself. Before I start building, I want to go over a few things. Eejanaika used to have a red and gray color scheme, and I'd like to try and match it best I can. How I'll do this is by using the darker tone pieces for the supports instead of what I normally use. And for the track, I'm going to use the orange track as it best matches the red. Over the past 6 months, I've been pushing myself with building the best supports I can. This project will be no different. I want the lift to be as realistic as possible, as it's almost 250 feet tall and draws a lot of attention. Turns out that's super easy to do with K'NEX. Just building a basic grid structure like this is nearly identical to the real thing, so I had no trouble building up a base and the lift structure. The next thing I did was add in the track and the chain. I used some long orange rods for probably the first time, as it's fine for the track. And for the pre-drop, I used some clear flexi rods, as the green ones just would look bad. With the lift done and working, I started on the drop. This may be one of the hardest drops that I've built. It took me multiple tries to get the track and supports in the right position to keep the scale correct. At the bottom, there are a ton of supports, as the cars are extremely heavy and moving very quickly. My model has one less of these large supports, as I couldn't get it to look right. Now it's time to work on the giant Raven turn. Personally, I think Eejanaika's first Raven turn has the best looking supports out of the other two 4D coasters. I started with building up the first half of the element and making sure to add in all the little supports for realism and strength. Then I built up 4 5 gray rod tall tube supports. I then attached them to the base and added in the 2 horizontal supports which hold the track. I wanted to do this first so I could make sure that the track profiling was correct. However, this kind of backfired on me. So I've been working on the big structure here, and it's a little lopsided. It's not supposed to do that. It's supposed to be like completely vertical. So I think I'm gonna tear this down and do the supports from the bottom to the top instead of top to bottom. So that's exactly what I did. I started from the bottom, adding in supports slowly, making sure the vertical supports stayed vertical. I was already running out of the brown 180 degree connectors at this point, so I had to swap some of the lower supports to the orange ones, because I at least wanted this huge support to keep the darker color. So I finished this big support. It is probably the most overkill support I've ever seen, because it literally just holds the track up in 2 spots. It's very strong, however. It does not shake at all. I added a couple supports here, and then a couple down there, and then also there. Those aren't on the real thing, but it just makes it a little stronger. I don't like how this looks, but that's how it looks on the real thing. So it's whatever. So now I gotta bring the drop down, then level it off, and then there's the 0G roll. So, as I've said before, Eejanaika is a 4D roller coaster. Well, what is a 4D roller coaster? Well, I'm guessing a lot of you are familiar with the S&S 4D free spins, like all the Batman the Ride clones at the various Six Flags parks. But Eejanaika is a little different. Obviously, it's much larger and more extreme, but it also has one main difference than from the free spins. There are 2 tracks on Eejanaika, one for the train itself and another that controls the spin. You can see here how that works. The free spin doesn't have this. They're all, well, free spinning. At first, when I started planning Eejanaika, I wasn't going to make custom trains, but in my last project, The Ride to Happiness, I designed some custom spinning trains to replicate the real thing. Anyway, the design for Eejanaika's train is quite simple. It's simply just a base chassis with a rod for spinning with a seat on the end. It's quite impossible to give it a controlled spin, so this will work great. Now back to construction. So I've been building for a little bit now, and I've built a whole bunch, including like the drop here and then the 0G roll. It was really hard to find images of what the supports looked like, because like right here at the actual park, there's like a lift hill for another ride. So it's kind of difficult to find pictures. There's supposed to be more of these sports, but it's just a little overkill. So this looks better anyway. Sports for here, not too bad. I added in a couple extra braces just so it's a little stronger. So here's a little test. So after watching that back, I realized the train probably had a little bit too much speed going through that element there. I think it's fine. The scaling is pretty much perfect, and the car has a lot of speed on the real thing. So I'm hoping it'll work. We'll see after I build the next element. The next thing you know, I ran out of space again. So it's time to move the coaster out of my room. Moving out the Raven turn was especially difficult because it was quite wide and I didn't want to take it apart. But other than that, the move went smooth. So over the past week and a half, I've been feeling pretty sick, so I haven't recorded anything, but I've been working on it. I built a couple more elements, so I'm gonna run you through those real quick. So I finished the 0G roll, and then I started with the overbank, and then I did the fly to fly, or vice versa, whichever one it is. And I just want to note that the supports here and then here, I had to build less of them than the real coaster because I'm starting to run out of I've already run out of the gray rods here, but here's a view of this. I did have to do these supports a little different because I had to get the track that goes around and through them. There's also like some other supports like here and here, but they just looked really bad, so I removed them. And then another thing is the overbank. The rear ride doesn't half invert. It's more like at a 90-degree angle. But I tried that with using turns. It looked awful, and this looks a lot better, and it also runs a lot better. So I'm gonna keep it like this. I did just check on RCDB, and it is a fly to lie. The supports look a little weird. I'm not sure why that is. Maybe if I were to scoot this support this way and then add another one, it'd look not so weird. After recovering from my illness, I kept on building using whatever pieces I could find. The final Raven turn and fly to lie were interesting to build as I was completely out of gray rods. I think I did a pretty good job considering the circumstances. But here is where I ran into a new problem. The track didn't line up, however I had a solution. But with that solution I ran into another problem. Let me explain. I found a booster at a thrift store and saw that it had a short half-length piece of track. Cool, there's my solution. Nope, for some reason they decided to use a triangle screw. Why? Probably because you're not supposed to use it other than for the booster. Well, that's not stopping me. I started asking around for a triangle drill bit, and in the meantime I looked for another option. I started with taking the booster apart, looking for another way to remove the piece of track from the inside. Unfortunately, that didn't work, so I waited patiently for the answer about my drill bit. Fortunately, a few days later, I managed to find a friend who had one, and I got my piece of track. Yes, I could have just redesigned the final brake run, but where's the fun in that? Now with the track work complete, I just need to finish the brake run and then add a catwalk to the lift and any other final details. And with the coaster all done, I now present to you my K'NEX recreation of Eejanaika.